for being here. I want to thank everyone who's here on the panel. I imagine we'll have some people who will come in later. My name is Alex. I am the Digital Equity and Virtual Services Manager at Baltimore County Public Library. And I'm thrilled that all the people who are on this panel were able to join me, and I'm so grateful. And I'm really excited to talk about libraries as anchor institutions. I don't know, Julie, do we have any housekeeping things that we need to do, or can I just introduce Liz and get started? Okay. So I'm going to introduce our panelist, our moderator first, and that is Liz, and she's here from Libraries for Digital Equity. And I first met Liz at LibLearnX, where I attended her session on digital equity, and she provided a workbook there, and I actually keep it on my desk. I use it all the time. Yes, I do. She's the founder and director of Libraries for Digital Equity, and she was the digital equity. She's the digital equity guru for the policy advocacy nonprofit Every Library Institute. And I'm thrilled that she agreed to be moderator for our panel discussion today, because I've seen her present and she's much better at that kind of thing than I am. So I'm very happy. So I'm going to turn it over to Liz and go through our talking points for today and introduce the folks who are here on our panel. So thanks, Liz. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, that was the kindest introduction I think I've ever gotten. Thank you, Alex. Okay, so welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us. We get to talk about one of my favorite topics today, libraries, our critical role as anchor institutions, and how we're closing the digital divide. So just to establish the norms real quick, there's two acronyms that I think we will be using a lot today. We're going to talk about digital inclusion, and we'll say DI. And when we say digital inclusion, we're talking about the work that we're doing. And then we're also going to say digital equity, DE. That is the goal that we're working towards. So both of those terms are going to come up a lot today, but I thought I would get that on the table right off the bat. So we have 4 objectives for this webinar today. We want to understand what it means to be an anchor institution. We want to hear about innovative strategies in a few different libraries. We want to look at opportunities for collaboration. And we want to figure out how libraries fit in coalitions to build towards some of these shared goals. So as we go along, I think instead of introducing all of the panelists at once and dumping a bunch of bios on you, I will introduce them each as we invite them to answer a question for the first time. And as we are going through this, you are welcome to use the chat to participate. I also want to draw your attention to Tina and Ephraim, our 2 ASL interpreters who are here for accessibility. Feel free to use the chat if there's anything else that you need to be able to participate in this webinar. So we are going to start off with Alex. I've got to get back to my bios. Here we go. Okay. So our first topic we want to talk about today is we want to understand the role of anchor institutions, where we came from, what this actually means, what the definition is of an anchor institution, and why that means library. So Alex is going to introduce this in a little bit, talk about that context, and give us a bit of a picture of what it means to be an anchor institution. So Alexandra Houff is the manager of the Baltimore County Public Library's Digital Equity and Virtual Services Department. She oversees the digital equity initiatives for the library, the systems IT, and the relationship with the county's Office of Information Technology. With more than 15 years in the private tech sector, Alex specializes in making complex tech topics accessible to non-techies. She is passionate about digital inclusion and working within public libraries to ensure that technology is accessible to everyone. And when she's not at work, you can find her on a soccer sideline, at an art show, or traveling with her husband and 5 not quite grown children. So Alex, do you want to take it away and introduce this topic for us?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So when we talk about libraries as anchor institutions, I mean, I can't see everybody who's here. I know the panelists probably are fairly well versed in this, but historically libraries have served as kind of vital third spaces, which, are locations separate from your home and your work, where people can gather, interact, and engage with community. As anchor institutions, we kind of have several key functions. Again, I'm not talking about something that people don't already kind of maybe intuitively know, but to kind of put it out there is really important, I think. One of the first things is obviously the democratic access to knowledge, free and equal access to information, regardless of your socioeconomic status. There's not too many places in the world where you can walk in and have people from all socioeconomic spheres in the same place, trying to access the same kind of information, they're trying to access the same kind of resources, and support for lifelong learning. It's also a community hub and creates some social infrastructure. They're safe, they're welcoming. There's places for community events. They are supporting civic engagement and public discourse. A lot of libraries lately, in the last, 10 to 15 years have really included social support services. I know that our library, BCPL, is definitely kind of working in that sphere. Technology access is something that we've been doing as anchor institutions, digital literacy training. They're often cultural centers and they have language resources and multilingual collections. And libraries really focus a lot too lately on economic development. Again, BCPL is a good example of that. We've got a lot of small business resources and entrepreneurship. And so from this, that is the viewpoint of the library as an anchor institution. It's been important for children's and families with their story times. Those are all kind of traditional things that you think about, but people often don't think about their role, libraries' roles for new Americans, job seekers, elderly community. A lot of people with a lot of branches and libraries with their mobile outreach are really reaching into the senior communities. Limited access to technology. So really, it's just kind of a holistic view of the library as a community center. And it's vital to kind of a democracy. It's vital to the work that we all do. And I think that kind of helps kind of define libraries as anchor institutions. Yeah, and I think I don't know if anyone on the panel wants to add to that or feels differently, but I think that's kind of the way I understand the work that we do in libraries.
Okay, thank you for that, Alex. That's a great starting point. And there's one other element to being an anchor institution that I want to hit really quickly, and that is the role as a piece of our nation's broadband infrastructure. That physical infrastructure that is how we are all connected here today often depends on what we call the middle mile. That means the lines that are going between our major data processing center, large cities, and out into smaller communities. And that usually connects from the large center to what we call an anchor. And that historically has meant libraries, firehouses, post offices, other health clinics, other buildings like that have also been anchors, but libraries have been one of the most consistent anchors in building out our nation's broadband infrastructure. And so those things that Alex is talking about, those exciting evolutions in providing connectivity services, I think it's cool to see as kind of the next step in how we are still that middle mile connection piece between, the resources that exist and the resources that are actually available to people. Sorry about my dog. He can see out the window and there's something in the yard, so you're going to hear some squeaking, I think. Okay, so we're going to move on to our next topic. Actually, we're going to start up this real panel discussion. I want to start us with perspectives on libraries' roles from some library directors. So I'm going to introduce two of our panelists, Carrie and Sonia. I am going to start with Carrie, if you don't mind. Carrie Wilson is the Executive Director of Calvert County Library in Southern Maryland. Calvert has a budget of $7 million, 4 locations, plus 2 mobile services vehicles, and an incredible staff of nearly 100. Under her leadership, Calvert Library was one of the first libraries in the state to be fine-free. They are now in their 3rd year of working through recommendations from an anti-racism audit. Carrie is a longtime member and past president of the Maryland Library Association and served a rewarding term on the board of the Public Library Association. Prior to joining the team at Calvert, Carrie was head of technical services for Washington County Free Library and Western Maryland Regional Library. She earned her BA from St. John's College and her MLIS from Drexel University. And I'm also going to introduce, actually, no, let's start. Carrie, let me give you a second to go ahead and answer our first question. So the first thing I want to ask you is, how has your library's role as an anchor institution evolved over the past decade, both pre-pandemic and from 2020 on?
I think everyone had fairly similar-ish experiences during the pandemic. So I think what makes our library special, what probably makes all of our libraries special, is the people who work there. And so our staff are totally the value that makes the money that we get worthwhile for our community. That's what makes it special. And our staff have grown and kept pace with technological advances, but also with training around anti-racism and trauma-informed service, to speak to some of the areas that Alex pointed out, with the role that we take on in our community, even in a rural community like Calvert, where I think we're one of the wealthiest counties in the country. There are absolutely still pockets of poverty, and we definitely have folks experiencing homelessness who use our libraries. So all of that balancing of all the people that are using our institutions, I think it's our people that make us vital and make us an anchor. And I don't know if I've talked long enough to give Sonia a chance to come into the room or not, but
That was a great answer. Thanks, Carrie. I don't see Sonia here quite yet. So Carrie, I'm going to stick with you for a minute.
Sure.
So you talk about balancing those needs, those very different needs. How do you balance, especially the more traditional needs, things we think about, like, books and story time or literacy services? How do you balance those traditional needs with the evolving needs, digital demands?
Our staff are super well trained, and they're cross-trained in every department. So at Calvert Library, like, we don't have circulation staff and reference staff. We have children's staff because they are special and they get training that the other kids don't. But in general, anybody can work on any desk. And so everyone is trained to answer the digital questions, but also help a child find a book. And we do still have customers who don't use the internet. One of our, as I was discussing the questions that we're talking about today with our branch managers, and one of them told a story that she'd helped someone who came in and needed something that she really did, like, was going to involve a computer to get the answer to. I don't recall the details of it, but she's like, "Oh no, I don't touch those things." And so the branch manager asked, "Well, do you have a smartphone?" And she said, "Oh yeah," pulled her phone out. And the branch manager was able to talk her through, like, how to do the things she needed to do on her pocket computer, but she was absolutely not going to touch a desktop. Like, she didn't do computers. So there's that element of, we definitely have people, and they're not older people, they are people, right, who don't want to use computers and aren't comfortable with them. But so that's a piece of just helping people where they are, as we kind of balance our physical and digital collections. I think we spend about 30% of our collection budget on digital, and that's about where our usage goes. It's about 30% digital and 60% physical. That only adds up to 90%. Don't pay attention to me in numbers. Anyway, but I think that's one of the biggest challenges, the balancing demand for physical and digital stuff, is kind of the money that we put into our collections. And then it's the training of our customers, right? We still have CD books, but some of our neighboring libraries in Southern Maryland do not. And, we're fast approaching that day when we're not going to circulate CD books. And that's going to be, every time we add a new format or get rid of something, that's a whole nother, like, training piece of helping people to transition from one thing to another. And then there's the whole world of, like, getting people online, which is, I think we'll talk about later in today's webinar. So.
Yeah. Well, what about, in addition to the collections, the resources that you're providing, what about balancing the programming needs of your community, both the traditional needs and the more modern digital needs?
I just feel like that's a thing we do every day, right? There's even in, yeah, we just try to meet community need. And if that's technological, then it's technological. And then there's like some stuff that's an overlap, right? We have one big highway that runs through our county, and it's not the safest road anyone's ever been on. It's not the worst, but it's not the best. So we're doing I think the title of the program, just because these are not exciting programs to come to, is like staying alive on Route 4, which is kind of terrible. But anyway, that's the title of our program. But so that's kind of about driver safety, but it's also secretly also about how to help your older relative or your relative who's not doing well driving transition and make good choices about driving. And so there's actually some apps that we'll be talking about during that program. So it is both a traditional and a technological. It's so mixed. It's so mixed together these days that I can't make a distinction. And probably if you talk to my programming people, they'd be able to tell you a difference. But those worlds have crept together so tightly at this point.
That's great. And I love that program title. That's something that I've seen in programming. You know, we're talking a lot about these services for digital literacy, building digital skills. When you can give a specific, really specific outcome in your program title, your attendance is so much better.
Half outcome and half clickbait, right?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. That's what works. That's what gets people in the door. Okay, so since I'm not seeing Sonia here quite yet, I think I'm gonna, oh, go ahead.
No, just in the chat, one of our colleagues who works for University of Maryland's Extension Service, and they're, I think Maria, I don't have your title in my head, but we've been working really closely with them. And one of our staff, James, has been like helping. He and Maria have been teaching tech classes at the senior centers. It's part of our kind of Chromebook distribution, which I'm sure will get talked about later too. But they're doing all sorts of good work together. So.
That's really cool.
Shout out to Maria.
Yeah, I appreciate that shout out. Actually, that is an excellent bridge into the next section. I want to talk about those collaborations and those partnerships. So I'm going to pivot to focus on Ashley and Tamar. I'm going to start by introducing Tamar. Let me find my bios again. Okay, Tamar Sarnoff. Tamar has been the director of the Public Libraries and State Networking Branch of the Maryland State Library Agency since 2017. In this capacity, she supports library development and oversees the Library Services and Technology Act, LSTA, grant program. She has had many roles in her 10+ years in urban, suburban, and academic libraries before joining MSLA. Her interests include ensuring that public libraries are relevant, exciting destinations, and that libraries are able to tell compelling stories about the impact of service on individuals and communities. She received her BA and MLIS from SUNY at Albany and her PhD from the University of Arizona's Department of Communication. And I'm going to go ahead and introduce Ashley as well. Got her in here. Here we go. Ashley Teagle is the CEO of the Southern Maryland Regional Library Association, SMRLA. She is originally from Salisbury, Maryland, and relocated to Southern Maryland to pursue a career in public libraries. Ashley has her BA in English and Communications Arts from Hood College, Frederick, Maryland, and a Master of Library and Information Science degree from the University of Southern Mississippi. Ashley's professional interests include digital equity, intellectual freedom, and developing inclusive libraries. She was excited to be the recipient of a 2023 Digital Inclusion Grant to fund hotspot lending for Southern Maryland's public libraries. Ashley is active in several professional organizations, including the American Library Association, the Black Caucus of the Maryland Library Association founding member, Maryland Library Association Executive Board member, Maryland Library Association Legislative Panel member, Maryland Library Association Library Leadership Training Committee co-chair, Maryland Association of Public Library Administrators past president, and Executive Board member. Ashley has a passion for libraries and enjoys telling anyone who will listen about how awesome they are. So I'm going to start with my first question for the two of you, and I will, Tamara and Ashley, I will let you volunteer yourselves who wants to answer first. So how do you facilitate collaboration, just like Carrie was talking about, that collaboration between libraries, other state agencies, and other organizations to enhance community services?
I'm deferring to Tamar first.
Okay, so we have been working with a bunch of state agencies and expanding our partnership capacity around the state. We have a really strong relationship with the University of Maryland's School of Information, I think is what they recently changed their name to, and the UMD Extension Program to support their digital trainers and navigation without reinventing the wheel for the work that was already being done in libraries. We also work as closely as we can, and again, these are all, new or rebirthed relationships with the Maryland State Department of Education, MSDE, to identify ways that we can support different needs around the state. One of the most impactful that we've had most recently was we received funding, the agency received funding from the Department of Education to support the Hatchlings program, which is early learning skills for expectant and new parents in English and Spanish, which has we're so excited that is recently a recipient of Institute of Museum and Library Services leadership grant to expand nationally, which is hugely exciting for us. We also are meeting with the Department of Community and Innovations and Youth Crime and Prevention. We have been trying to work with the Office of Broadband with specific relationship to digital equity and digital inclusion. That's been a hard nut to crack, but we're gonna keep at it. We also have other, internal mechanisms, which I think maybe we'll talk more about in some of the other questions, but I do want to, Doug's been mentioning Sailor and the State Library Resource Center here, and the work that they do is phenomenal and essential to what needs to happen to make Maryland such a special place. And then the regionals as well. And I think Ashley can speak to more boots on the ground with the regional aspect.
Thanks, Tamar. That was a nice segue. So, yes, to me, I feel like when we're talking digital equity and digital inclusion, it's very similar to everything else we do with this idea of who can we partner with that will help us in this work, and what does that look like within a library space. And so, yeah, I'm really glad Maria's here. I actually got to see her in person for I think the first time in a really long time at the Digital Equity Summit a few weeks ago. But yeah, I think that's a great and natural partnership. Like, we know libraries offer computer training and classes. And I know that's something that's mentioned in the statewide digital equity report, that, libraries kind of self-reported that these are activities that we do. And so with this idea of having digital navigators coming within our spaces to offer the training, I'm like, that is a really easy, low-hanging win, just to get together with our tech extension educators and just to pull them into programs to train staff on how to do more effective tech programs. And then, yeah, Tamara, it's funny you said that with the Office of Statewide Broadband, because for SMRLA, we were able to get a grant, which I think is wonderful. But I do agree, I think there's more opportunity for a continuing conversation as we're thinking about how do we continue to progress from one-off grant opportunities and maybe looking ahead more to like a sustainability approach is how I think of it. But I will say the hotspot program was really useful because I felt like in talking to the library directors, because hotspots are a thing that gets borrowed, they may or may not come back. They may come back damaged. And so really, I think getting that digital inclusion grant helped us fill some gaps in that loaning collection to really meet some needs more immediately. And then more specifically to the regional libraries. So for those that aren't aware, Maryland's rural libraries get support from what we call our regional libraries. And so really, I'm a library that serves other libraries. And so through things like offering staff training, especially on those tech topics, I think that's another more sustainable way that we can think about how to support folks that work front of the desk with the customers. And then also just the fact that by virtue of what my organization does, it also creates these really natural opportunities for once a month conversations with leaders across our region to just have conversations about how things are going, where we're seeing needs, and to have honest conversation about, is this something that we should look at pursuing as a region? Are there ways that Smirla can help in individual circumstances? And so I think for us, that's really been an ongoing piece of trying to solve this whole puzzle.
That's really interesting. If I were to ask you to identify the most effective statewide initiative as far as, well, I say effective, why don't we look at it two different ways? What would you say is one of the most effective statewide initiatives for meeting those individual, Maryland resident needs? And what is one of the most effective statewide initiatives you've seen for supporting library needs and anchor institution needs?
I have to make myself notes as you were talking to keep myself on track here. So most effective at state and local.
Can I talk about our Chromebook program, Ashley?
Please
Yeah,
do.
go for it.
Okay. So one of the things that the Office of Broadband, which is our state office that's trying to make sure everybody in Maryland is online, they did a lot of grants during the pandemic. That's why we have so many hotspots. That's why Ashley needed to get a grant so that we could keep paying for the data for our hotspots, because that's been a challenge. But one of the things they did in the last year as the Office of Broadband is to do a connected devices program. So they bought a awful lot of Chromebooks, and they said gave each county in the state the ability to apply for whatever number of Chromebooks they thought they could distribute. And these are to be distributed to low income folks. So it's people who have to hit either they have SNAP benefits or they meet income guidelines, veterans, disabled veterans who are at a certain income level, whatever the case. And so we have all been working with our county governments, and so libraries and county governments and other county agencies working together to get these Chromebooks distributed and to get people trained. So that's one of the ways that Maria and the folks at University of Maryland Tech Extension, Digital Navigators, whatever their great title is, have been working with us to make sure that we are all like teaching people how to use these things and getting those out. And then making sure the folks also have internet so that they can use their Chromebooks. So that has all been a very cool program.
That's really cool.
And yeah, Carrie, I'm glad you brought that one up because I think that probably has been the most successful program to date. And I know in Southern Maryland, we're having some conversation about doing another round of that to make sure that we fully have reached everyone that is eligible. Because from a library perspective, we're resource limited in the sense of, we're not open 24 hours a day. We don't typically have equipment that people can always take with them. So this connected devices program is wonderful in the sense that folks get to keep this device and they really get to explore how best to use it for whatever needs they're trying to meet. And when you think about people today and how we're using our devices, they're very personal to us. And so this idea of like, you come in a library and for your privacy, we're going to wipe that device of anything that you did after your session is over. But this idea of like, this is mine, I can log in and save my credentials and really create my own repository of a digital life, I think is really important and life changing for people, with the way that our digital life has transitioned. Um, and so, yeah, I think more of that. And again, Office of Statewide Broadband, who I know is just if I think they've already opened up the application cycle, but grant funding, because I think that anytime that you can make a funding resource available, it's not a shortage of ideas coming out of libraries about how are we trying to bridge this gap. It is typically a funding issue. And I'll put Alex on the spot too, because I went to a session that you did about BCPL's long-term lending program, and I definitely have that on my radar of like, how do we do that in Southern Maryland? I think that's just an excellent model.
Yeah, I mean, I think the long-term lending program, now originally that was set up to do, to kind of take advantage of ACP, right? So the whole point of the long-term lending was you would be able to borrow it for 3 months, and over the course of the time that you had it for that router for 3 months, we'd be working with you to get you connected permanently. It was never supposed to be a situation where people were using it as their only source of connectivity. But with the failure to refund the ACP, that program has become almost invaluable to everything that we do on a regular basis now. So we've been lucky to be able to get more grant funding, to extend it for another year. So, so that buys me a little time to figure out how to get it into our budget for realsies. And so like, right now I'm focused on kind of streamlining the program so that we can make it as efficient as possible, so that I can get people to say, oh yeah, this is absolutely worth it for us to fold it into our budget. I think it's been a roaring success, which on some levels is kind of depressing because it has been so successful, and it does have qualifications like the Chromebook giveaway. So you're like, yay, people are using it and they're getting connected to the internet, and that's so great. But boo, because people need them. And that is what kind of continues to drive us in the work that we're doing here, is to kind of try to figure out how we slot into that affordability problem that we've got with broadband connectivity. So so thank you for shouting out the long-term lending program. We would like to keep it going. And so we're working really hard to get that done. But it is a great thing that I think libraries have the opportunity to do, and we should continue to try to do if we can.
And I'd like to just take a moment to brag about the work that the agency's done to support these programs. The extension of the ACP program was a Library Services Technology Act grant that was given to float the program as you identify other resources. Since 2014, including ARPA funds to support vans, but to support digital literacy, digital equity, Wi-Fi hotspots, Chromebooks, and other things. The State Library Agency has given out $5.8 million in resources to connect residents and people in your communities to not only access to the internet, but to training around how to use resources online. And there's also been one of the other programs that we support is the E-rate program around the state, which is incredibly valuable and underutilized in most places because the process is so difficult. But in the past 4 years, 2019 to 2022 are the most recent numbers, Maryland Public Libraries have recouped $1.2 million in E-rate funds to keep these programs going. And I know that the cost of actually like getting, the brass ring of digital equity in Maryland is billions with a B. But we are doing everything we can to throw money at this bottomless pit of need.
Yeah. Tamar, on that note, these programs that we're talking about that are so successful, the state library is doing incredible things to support the anchor institutions, the libraries, in being able to get these resources and support out into the community. What additional need for support do you see from your perspective? Support for anchor institutions, for libraries.
Well, so there's a couple ways that we can talk about anchor institutions. There's the FCC definition of anchor institutions, which is essential for getting special funding. So if you are a director on this call or an IT person, please check the FCC maps to make sure that your library is identified as an FCC anchor institution. But the needs around the state are endless, and I really, I come up against this issue of we don't have the resources, financial, staff, expertise, to really, do everything that needs to be done. And I don't know that it should be our responsibility. I think that, we're filling a gap that exists, and we always will come up short because of that billions of dollars. But we do an amazing job with what we have. There are thousands of circulating Wi-Fi hotspots. There are thousands of circulating computers we offer, and I know the libraries offer training to their staff and to the public on digital navigation. We were providing North Star as a tool to support that. The State Library Agency provided licenses to Zoom and JAWS to provide access for the blind and print disabled to be able to use technologies. And, we hope that, what we're hearing from the communities that we work with is sufficient, because it is a very fine balance to, take an extremely limited amount of money to address all these needs all around the state. We're working with some libraries to, get them on board so they can participate in E-rate. They don't have the staff or the expertise in-house. So connecting them with E-rate consultants who can file on their behalf. And, using squeezing all the juice out of whatever resources we can get, and balancing the needs across the state, because the needs are different in different places, and just trying to balance it to make sure that there's the capacity within the library to do it, and sustain the program beyond the grant year.
Tamara, that is such a great point, and thank you for sharing that, what that's looking like. I'm seeing a lot of library folks on this call, but I'm also seeing a lot of non-library folks, and so I think that's really helpful to know what that looks like, from the inside, and what you're seeing, even while providing these incredible resources and this incredible support to anchors, what that existing gap still looks like.
And if anybody on the call is a funding institution and they want to talk offline, please let me know.
You've got some great, anybody here with deep pockets, you've got some great candidates. Okay, Ashley, I think I saw you come off mute for a second. I wanted to make sure you got a chance to share.
Oh, thanks, Liz. So yeah, and then you asked also about like at the local level, and I just want to reiterate what Carrie said, because I think for library employees, it was such a stressful position to be put in when the world shut down because of a pandemic. And it's like people don't always give library staff their props. And I'm like, but guess who stood up and immediately filled that gap for the community? And so I think at the local level, it's the same as it's probably always been throughout library history, that it's always the people that drive that. And it's because it's the people that build the relationship with the community. They become the people that people trust. And so again, during the pandemic, thinking about people needing assistance, applying for benefits or trying to find work for those that were laid off, children trying to get connected for school. I'm like, these are all critical life functions that your libraries were helping to make possible.
That is, please go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, so I kind of wanted to jump in and talk a little bit about that kind of local component, to address directly the program that Carrie mentioned, the connected devices program. One of the things that was so valuable in that connected devices process was actually the opportunity to meet with every person that we handed a Chromebook to. You know, when we first started thinking about it, we're looking at it and we're like, oh, we have to hand this off. We have to check their qualifications, and we have to fill out a form. And at first you're kind of like, wow, that seems like quite the process. But ultimately what it did is it gave us an opportunity. Our Baltimore County Public Library gave out 3,000 of those Chromebooks. And that meant that we got to talk to 3,000 people. So we were able to sit down, and even if it was even if we were as efficient as we possibly could be, it was still at least a 3-minute engagement with that customer. And we were able to say, how's this going to help you? You know, you can't just sit there in silence when you're talking to someone and that you're looking at all their personal documents. You can't just be like, oh, okay. So actually, you know, having those conversations was so beneficial. It was great when we were doing it early on, because we were also able to kind of move them around the room over to digital navigators who were helping them get signed up for ACP, and the things that we were learning about the challenges that they were having with either their existing connectivity or their lack of connectivity, or what the problem was, and you know what a 50 meg connection would mean for them relative to an actual high-speed connection. So having those conversations was so important, and I think that is what comes back around to that local component that libraries and librarians bring to the experience and to the relationship. So while giving away those 3,000 Chromebooks was definitely a challenge, I think for a small staff the size of ours, it was still something we would do again, you know, every day and twice on Sunday, to actually have those communications and those conversations, because it helps inform everything that we do moving forward.
Wow, that's cool. So that point about those hidden opportunities and hidden advantages, I want to talk about that a little bit more. I want to introduce, though, our last panelist. Julie, thank you for sitting there so patiently as I kept calling on other people. I'm excited to hear from Julie Brophy. She is the manager of the Adult and Community Engagement Department at the Baltimore County Public Library, where she cultivates strategic partnerships and collaborations, provides leadership on services and events for adults, and looks for opportunities to connect in the community through mobile engagement and outreach, with an emphasis on supporting the most vulnerable in our community. Her work on business-focused programs and services includes Entrepreneur Academy, Academia de Emprendedores, and pop-up shops at the library, resulting in almost $2 million in savings for small businesses and entrepreneurs annually. That's pretty cool. So, Julie, in your experience, what unique advantages and opportunities do libraries have in meeting these challenges, closing the digital divide?
Well, thanks so much, Liz, for having me. It's been really interesting hearing the conversation. I was not bored at all. I wasn't just sitting here. I was very interested in the whole conversation. I think so much of the work that we do in the Adult and Community Engagement Department, and I think in branch libraries and in libraries across Maryland and across the country, we interact with those individuals who have the most need most of the time, right? Those people who have access issues, those people who don't know where to go. One of the things that I think about a lot is, you know, in an age where a lot of us have a hard time trusting anyone, libraries are still pretty trusted institutions in our communities. Our physical spaces, even our mobile physical spaces, we are out there around in our community in so many places where other agencies and other groups can't get. For us at Baltimore County, that's 19 branches. Our bookmobiles visit senior communities and apartment complexes and all kinds of different places. And that physical space and the hours we are open, you know, more than the traditional 9 to 5, all of those things are critical for us to like a critical advantage for libraries, I think, in this work and in all of our work. And that might seem very obvious in many ways, but I think that's something that we often talk, at least I often talk about with partners. Like, we're not here to redo what you've done or recreate the wheel. You're doing this thing in a great way, but there are a whole lot of things that we can bring to the table as we work with you.
That's great. Julie, I'm also interested to hear a little bit more about your support for entrepreneurs and especially what that has looked like just in the past few years as there's an even larger focus on digital services and digital skills.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've done since 2018, Baltimore County Public Library has put a lot of emphasis on building up our support for small business and entrepreneurship. So back then in 2018, 2019, we created Entrepreneur Academy. It's our flagship foundational small business entrepreneurship series. It's a 7-week program where participants learn a variety of different elements, market research, record keeping, taxes, those fun things. Everybody loves to think about taxes. And so that at the end of the 6 weeks, they all have the elements of a business plan ready to go. When we started out, we worked with partners like the Small Business Development Center and Cash Campaign of Maryland and our colleagues at Enoch Pratt Free Library to create the series. And the goal was definitely to support under-resourced, underrepresented entrepreneurs. Usually that meant entrepreneurs of color, female entrepreneurs, and entrepreneurs who don't primarily speak English at home. So, we started off offering this support in person and, that we had limitations on how many people we could have. 30 people in a room is all we could fit. We would provide laptops for people to use because we weren't sure what their access was during class time. But of course, 2020 came along and we had to make a massive shift. Didn't mean that people were stopping, creating businesses. They were still in those idea stage, still trying to find money and still trying to work to find ways to survive, whereas we want to help them try and thrive. So in 2020, we started offering it virtually, but we were really concerned, right? Who are we going to be leaving behind by offering this virtually? And who wasn't going to be able to take advantage of it because of access? And so we've, since kind of iterated Entrepreneur Academy into something that can be done on a phone, on a laptop. We've used that opportunity to stay connected if people express an interest to really talk about opportunities to do the program from the library. You can use one of our computers. We have Wi-Fi. If you have a device and you need Wi-Fi, you can do it, from our libraries. And also, it's given us an opportunity to talk a lot about the programs that Alex and her team have put together, like long-term lending, and to talk about how you can check out hotspots and that sort of thing from the library. And so it's really kind of opened our eyes to what access looks like for our small business community, because some of it is just being the library space where they can come in and use the tools and the technology and the Wi-Fi access that we have.
That's interesting, and it's cool to hear how you are marrying those new ideas with the services that you've been providing that have just kind of always been sitting there. That's really interesting. I want to talk a little bit about innovative services that are evolving. Carrie, I'm going to start with you because I'd love to hear your perspective as a library director, and then I want to open it up to everybody, to all of the panel. So what innovative programs have you implemented or have you seen implemented that are really standing out as being, a new way to address the digital divide, thinking about these problems or solutions in a new way?
I don't have a great answer to this question. Alex sent the questions out early, so we all had time to think about it. And I'm not sure we have done anything that I think is innovative.
Well,
We've done the same thing that everybody's done. Yeah.
Let me expand it. What little component of something that you're doing have you seen that is innovative, or what tweak have you made that's made something work that hasn't before?
I'm not sure that helps me, Liz, but I appreciate appreciate it. We when we put Wi-Fi into our buildings back whenever that was, we they extended into our parking lots. So that happened, you know, that was a big thing during the pandemic was, let's get your Wi-Fi extended into your parking lot. And we did that a long time ago. So, you know, we had already been, I think we already had hotspots, but you know, the pandemic probably for many of us is this kind of like hazy time where things happened, and I'm not quite sure how they happened. Like, but suddenly we had a whole bunch of hotspots and we were loaning Chromebooks and we were online doing story time, but I'm pretty sure that everybody was. But I'm not sure I'm not certain that that's true because we really, at least during the pandemic, we did seem like we were faster than anybody else in our community and making that adjustment. And I think that's just because our staff are, as Julie and Alex and everybody have said, we are connected. We're connected to our communities already. We know what the needs are, and we are always in a process of adjusting to meet those. So I think, and as Ashley said earlier too, like it's about partnerships. So we make connections and partnerships with people. Like I called the state office of broadband early on, was like, all right, what have you got money for? Because I know you have money and I know we need it. So, you know, we got some of our hotspots we got because I called the office and the guy who was running the office said, yeah, I've got hotspot money. Like, let's get that worked up for you. And I don't know how that happened. So it's really just about figuring out what you need and who can get it for you and making the phone calls. And sometimes it's totally outside of programs that exist. So I guess that's my innovative bit, is that I have no shame when it comes to making calls and finding money to do the things that our community needs.
That's awesome. And I mean, you can try to write it off, but looking at those partnerships and having an idea of, oh, maybe this person can collaborate and help, and the ability to pivot and respond so rapidly to needs, I think that requires an innovative mindset from you and your staff. So,
I'll take it. Yeah.
Yeah.
We just built a new building. So I'll give you another example of that. We just built a new branch, and there's a mile that doesn't have fiber between the new library and the rest of the county fiber. And so again, called the broadband office. I'm like, I'm sure you can help me find the money to put aerial fiber in this last mile. And it's probably taken 3 years to get to the place where we're actually like, we got the grant 2 years ago, but then we had to convince the State Office of Technology that they wanted to own it, because that's a whole different thing, right? You can install fiber when somebody has to manage it. So yeah, just don't give up. Just don't give up. That's my advice.
I love that. Beautiful. Okay, let me open this question to the rest of the panelists. What innovations are you seeing?
Well, I just want to jump in here really quick and kind of let Carrie off the hook a little bit, because I really feel like we are talking about things that are that we take for granted as being done, but really they are still innovations, right? It still is an innovation to think that you're going to extend your Wi-Fi into the parking lot, right? Just because you think everybody's doing it, that might not be true, right? We're all doing it because we're talking about it and we're working together on it, and we know that this is such a vital thing for our communities, but it still is innovative, right? It still is something that we push to make happen. And again, it is a very bizarre kind of time compression and expansion between the pandemic and now, because I feel like it was yesterday and also about a decade ago. So again, when you're thinking about, extending the Wi-Fi into the parking lot, that's still a thing, right? It's still important. Circulating hotspots, we started doing that in early 2020. We have obviously, it expanded a great deal immediately following the first time that we circulated hotspots. Like a month later, we had, somehow we planted a seed and grew hotspots and suddenly had a whole proliferation of them. But those are all still innovative things. So I don't want, Carrie, don't sell yourself short. I think we're all doing innovative work. It's just that we are also kind of in an echo chamber of people who are doing innovative work. So we're not thinking about what it looks like outside of that. And so, still yay for everybody. So and again, I could go on and talk about the long-term lending and how innovative I think that is. But I really, I would love to hear from other people about the things that maybe you don't think are innovative, again, because we're talking in this echo chamber of people who are doing similar work. But what you might not think of as innovative, I might think of as innovative. So I don't think anybody should hesitate to say even the little things that they're doing.
Well, Julie put in chat what I was going to highlight. I mean, I feel like in Southern Maryland, a lot of conversation about creating access through mobile vehicles, which is also something that I feel like is new-ish because, again, people have a very nostalgic view of like what a bookmobile does. And we're like, no, it's a mobile library because you can check out a hotspot from us now. You can be parked nearby this vehicle and hop on and get Wi-Fi access. And I think based on how slow it is of a process to get an actual library building, that potentially is filling a huge gap that I don't think we give ourselves enough credit for. Like, even if it's just somebody that needs access to that printer. Carrie, I think your mobile library, and I think also Charles County has a printer on their vehicle now. And I'm like, that's tremendous because in the rural spaces, especially, there's no metro or train system that's getting people to branches. And so that's really been invaluable. And so I really like this idea in rural communities, especially, that it's not just a bookmobile, it's an actual moving mobile branch of the library that can do all the things that you get when you come to a building.
Yeah, Ashley, you bring up the mobile services, and I was thinking of the Mobile Library Support Center, which is a vehicle that we have here in Baltimore County that, yes, has a bit of collection in it, but it is really about bringing services out there. And we work a lot with, my team works a lot with Alex's team at places like our West Side Men's Shelter, to bring digital opportunities and learning and access to those individuals in particular. And it's, these men may not be able to get into the library and get there where they need to be, and we're going to them. And so that's, it is absolutely sort of, but I hear you about the nostalgia around bookmobiles because we get that a lot too.
Mar, do you have anything on that topic of innovations that you're seeing?
Carrie, I don't want to harp on your thing, but I think somebody already mentioned that, like, just because it's not necessarily innovative globally, if it's innovative for you, if you're trying something, that's just as important. Your community is changing all the time, and your response to your community needs to be adaptive. So innovation isn't necessarily some grand statement of newness. But it's trying something and iterating it and seeing how it can, do the most for your community at any given time. So, I think there's, big I innovative, but there's also small I innovative. And none of us should sell ourselves short for trying new things and tacking on the term innovation.
I love that point. And like Carrie just put in the chat, I want innovation to be sparkly. Yes, when I said, what is your innovation? I hope it didn't come across as, what is your library service that was on the front page of Time magazine? These are what you're talking about. These are the real work that I think is so important. So I'd like to take a second now to introduce our last panelist. Thank you so much, Sonia, for joining us. Sonia Alcantara-Antoine is the CEO of the Baltimore County Public Library, overseeing 19 branches, 600 dedicated staff, and an annual budget of $45 million. Prior to joining Baltimore County Public Library, she was director of Newport News Public Library and held leadership positions at Virginia Beach Public Library and Enoch Pratt Free Library. Alcantara-Antoine is active in the Public Library Association, where she is currently past president, and the Urban Libraries Council, where she serves on the Anti-Racism and Digital Equity Action Team, and is a member at large for the Maryland Association of Public Library Administrators Board of Directors. an American Library Association Spectrum Scholar. She holds a master's degree in library and information science from Florida State University and a master's degree in public administration from Old Dominion University. So, Sonia, my question for you is, especially because we're coming off this topic of innovation, your library's role as an anchor has shifted over the years. Carrie told us a little bit about Calvert Library and how it has shifted. Can you tell us about how Baltimore County's role as an anchor institution has shifted and changed?
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Liz. And I'm so happy to be with everybody today. I apologize for being tardy. I'm in a different time zone and I got my times mixed up. So I, again, apologize, but I'm really happy to be here to talk about this topic. I'm really passionate about digital equity and talking about how we can achieve it in our communities. I think what's really critical is understanding that we're in a new era in libraries. When I started my career in libraries, I think it was on the tail end of the earlier era or time in libraries where libraries were quiet places for reading and study and contemplation. And we're in a new era where our libraries are community hubs and they're noisy and they're vibrant spaces where there's lots of activity happening. And sometimes it's quiet, but more often than not, it's noisy and it's messy because our libraries are there to serve our communities. I tell folks the word public comes before the word library, which is a definite shift in our focus and in our energies. And so as part of that service to the community, it's about identifying inequities where they exist. It's about confronting those inequities, and it's about directly addressing those inequities to really level the playing field for people in your communities. And I think that the pandemic was a time when a lot of the social safety nets that existed just evaporated. And the library really was the only thing standing in between people like just losing everything and losing their minds. We kept people safe, we kept people sane. And that really is a critical shift in terms of what libraries are today. And I think we have an opportunity to lean into that, but leaning into that means applying resources. It's one thing to say, oh yeah, we want to eradicate inequities in our community. But if you're not putting money towards it in your budget, if you're not applying staff towards it, then those are just empty words. It's really about right-sizing our budgets and reallocating resources appropriately so that, yes, we're still serving our traditional role, but we're also leaning more into the non-traditional, this new era of library services in the 21st century.
Thank you. That's a really thoughtful and a really interesting answer. I want to highlight in the chat, a couple of folks have been talking about AI, which actually brings me to another topic I wanted to address with our panelists, which is emerging technologies, new trends, how this is impacting the future of libraries as anchor institutions. So Julie, I'll start with you because you have a little bit of a heads up on this question about what emerging technologies or trends libraries should be preparing for. But then I'm also going to bring it back to Sonia. I want you to talk about that budget side of things and that balance side of things. How do you explore these new ideas? So Julie, let's start with you. What trends, what new technologies are you seeing that are going to impact libraries?
So we were talking about AI and how we view it and what we're doing around AI in the chat a little bit. And much like with every technology, I think the role that my team and I play in this for our community is how do we get people to understand? How do we get people to use? How do we get people to use it well, use it safely, whatever technology might be? Like right now, everyone's talking AI. AI already has existed for a while, and it's been running some of the things that we use every single day. People don't necessarily understand that because we aren't talking about it in that way. And I think it's our role, at least my role and my team's role, to support the community in learning about how these tools can be best utilized and leveraged for their day-to-day life, whether it is looking for a job, whether it is using ChatGPT to write a grant, because I've seen that be a thing, or, even if it's using AI to set up an itinerary for places to visit in Iceland, whatever it might be. That is sort of where our focus is on supporting the community that way.
That's cool. Thank you. So on that same note, those new things that are coming in, those new ways to support the library, support the community as they're also experiencing these new technologies popping up or these new trends. Sonia, how do you balance the need for that focus?
I think you have to, the library plays all sorts of roles, right? And our traditional role is still there. Just because we're leaning into eradicating digital inequity, just because we're leaning into offering different types of resources to people, it doesn't necessarily mean that the traditional ways in which we serve our communities goes away. We still have books, we still do, story times, we still, do all the things that we always used to do, but this is now another layer on top of it. I think a lot of it has to do with putting your money where your mouth is, right? Again, if you're saying that something is a strategy, but if there are no resources allocated towards it, those are just empty words. So it is about applying resources intentionally, deliberately towards this new way of serving communities. And I also think it's about data, looking at data to make data-driven decisions. I think every library system in the country, for example, has shifted towards purchasing more digital resources and e-resources for their community based on increasing numbers of usage. And so paying attention to what people are reading, what they're checking out, and applying those resources in a smart way, I think is the way to do it. In my library system, I know Alex talked about the fact that we have over 1,000 hotspots in our community and in our collection. And it's paying attention to how those hotspots are being used. We started out with 50, and incrementally we have increased it. And we probably could double and triple and quadruple that collection, and it probably would never be enough. But it's paying attention to how people are using it, how many are checked out, how big is the whole list, and applying those resources in a way that has maximum impact so that we're serving our community, trying to meet that need. The challenge for us in libraries is that there's always going to be a tipping point. With those 1,000 hotspots, we're essentially subsidizing internet for folks. And everybody knows what it's like when your Verizon bill comes in the mail, when you get that T-Mobile bill for your internet or for your cell phone. There's a cost to that. Well, times that by 1,000. And so our budgets are finite. And so we're not going to be able to have 1 million hotspots in our collection and be able to offer that to the community. So it's figuring out what's enough investment to address needs and meet needs, and how do we keep building that and how do we expand on that, but also understanding what the limitations are and getting creative in terms of how we seek that investment and that funding.
Yeah, and that requires a little bit of future forecasting, I think, which is always tricky. That might be a good point for us to move. We're in the last third of our webinar now, and so let's talk about the future. Let's talk about what is going on. I want to start with, let's see, I'll move backwards. No, I'll do the same process that we introduced you in to invite you to answer this question. So I want to hear what you foresee as one of the biggest challenges facing libraries, specifically in our role as anchor institutions over the coming years. So we're going to start with Carrie, and if you remember the order you were introduced in, that's how much time you have to come up with your answer. Carrie, I'm going to start with you. What is that biggest challenge that you are envisioning?
I mean, Sonia touched on it. It's always funding, right? But I think my twist on that is it's funding, but it's also the fact that we, again, as Sonia said, we are so many things to so many people, right? We are all of the traditional library services that we've offered for years. We are all of the innovative tech-focused things. We are doing strategic foresight and futuring. So we're also we are trying to actively prepare for where we're going to be in 10, 15, 20 years. So we do all these things, and some of our community members know that we do 2 things or 3 things because they know what they use us for. So I think the other challenge facing us is just leveraging outcome and impact data and stories in a better way so that we can really make sure that we're maintaining our role and the fact that people see us as anchor institutions. I know I get kind of focused on doing the work sometimes and not talking about it. And I think that's just going to be a hugely important part of where we go in the future. It always has been, but it's going to be more important.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Okay, I think Tamar responded next, and then we'll go to Ashley.
So I think one of the biggest challenges is people don't care. People, consider themselves experts on topics because they do 3 minutes of Google searching. They see the library as a place for books and only books, and that we provide all these other resources to empower people is lost on too many customers. And that's not something that we can, again, not another issue we can solve here, but there's just a general distrust of expertise, and people thinking that they are fully informed when they're not, and they don't see the library as an ally in getting them the actual resources that they need to be as informed as people claim that they are. So I think that they see the library as antagonistic to and challenging their expertise, when really we can be an ally in helping people build their expertise. That's for me right now with the election coming up. That is just like the biggest thing for me, is that we are not the enemy. We are an ally.
Yeah, part of the solution for information literacy. I appreciate that, Tamar. Ashley.
Yeah, I'll piggyback on Tamar because I would characterize it as low literacy across the board. So, like for me, there's literacy of all types. And I think because of the pandemic, a huge emphasis on this idea of like digital literacy. But even recently, like here in Southern Maryland, having a conversation about we should get back to programs about books. Yes, please. Because I just saw a stat that the Baltimore Banner published about 8th graders, and like less than 40% of them know how to filter information. So it's like you're teaching these children about our political system. And maybe in the next 4 or so years, they become voters and they don't know what to do with all the information that's coming their way. And then I'll also add to that, I think a lack of regulation on things. So I think this idea of technology as unchecked is actually very harmful. So even when you think about things like AI or social media, it's like we shouldn't be backtracking and thinking about how to rein it back in once we let, the horse out of the gate and it's like taking over society in these really damaging ways. I think part of this has to be building in some accountability. And I would love to see libraries step into that role a little bit more too, because I feel like we see firsthand the damage it does to someone to have their identity stolen, and they're trying to come to the library to figure out how to either lock their credit report or get back into accounts that they rightfully should have access to. And I just think, yeah, the internet's become like this cesspool. And I'm like, in the library, we have things like codes of conduct for a reason. I'm like, we need that for our digital life at this point, because without it, we're just showing that AI companies can just scrape data and not give credit to content creators and just all the things. I just am worried we're really on a very harmful path, and 100% agree that, libraries are one of the last institutions probably in society that's going to help try to course correct that a little bit.
That is a great point. Thank you, Ashley. I'm going to I think, Alex, I haven't invited you to answer this question yet.
So the way I look at it is kind of from a genesis perspective, right? Like the kind of systemic side of things, and this is really, I talked about this with the long-term lending program. that the fact that we need it is problematic, right? And so I think that's really where I feel like we have an opportunity to kind of create that niche for libraries, is to kind of go back to where it all starts, right? I mean, one of our biggest issues is the affordability of connectivity. But where is that starting, right? Where are we finding that to be to actually originate? And I think that's really where libraries, again, you know, we are in a lot of ways these very democratic institutions, but we do have, I think, an opportunity, and Sonia mentioned it as well, like, where does our responsibility end for getting people connected to the internet, right? Like, how can we go all the way back and be like, why can't people afford this connectivity? And why is it so out of the reach of people? And how can libraries be like, look at what we are doing and realize that there's a huge gap here? So I think that's a big piece for me, is what is the systemic issue that we could help kind of shine a light on, to say, you know, we're doing all this work, we're doing it, we're helping people get connected, but should we be? Where does this really have to start, and how can we really get this kind of off the ground at a much earlier part, right? If you're looking at the spectrum of connectivity, we're coming in back here, but really it needs to be addressed back at the very beginning. And what does that look like, and how can we get that done? And what does that mean in education, from an education perspective? What does that mean about legislation, and how can we kind of help impact all of that? That's really where I see us moving in the next in the coming years. And again, mostly because I have talked to those 3,000 people who get Chromebooks, and I'm like, wow, this started so much earlier than where we are right now.
That's great. Thanks, Alex. Julie.
So I would say yes to basically everything that was just said from everyone. Like, there's a lot of challenges that libraries, but more broadly, I think, as a country, as a society, we face. No, I think if I think about the library and where we are right now and what we are looking for to be as an anchor institution, some of the challenge I think that we're going to have to face in the near, next 5-10 years is, how do we staff, and what are the expectations of staff as we try to be more things to more people? And, we can hire experts in and bring experts in, but the reality is if we want to, Alex is building her team in the digital equity and virtual services department, and that's an important part of it. And how we develop these teams to really try and, look at problems and look at issues in our community, we need to have the staff that can make that happen and do it most effectively. We, like many other library systems, we have social workers in our libraries, and we are continuing to hire them. But the challenge with any of these unique positions that are also exist other places is, how do we make sure that their capacity, like, we don't push them beyond what they can do because the need is so great? And so finding that sweet spot of traditional library services and how we also can support our community and the broad, big community in all of their needs is really a challenge.
That's interesting. Thanks, Julie. Sonia.
Ditto to everything that everybody said. The thing that I think is going to be a big challenge for us, and continues to be, is just partisan politics. Libraries are not partisan. We're not neutral, but we are also not, we are partisan rather. And yet our elected leaders don't see that. And so, I mean, just with the outcome of next week's election could change funding that's available on a national level towards eradicating digital inequity, and other resources that libraries rely on to be able to do what it is that they do every day as anchor institutions in our respective communities. And so that's challenging, and it's scary. that based on who wins an election or who loses an election, the whole landscape could change. And it just really requires us as leaders within libraries to be nimble, to be agile, especially when we are advocating for our libraries and talking to elected officials. You sometimes even have to like code switch and change the words that you use depending on the party of the person that you're talking to, and to be able to sell the library and sell the concept of a library as an anchor institution in phrases and words that they agree with and understand. If you're talking to a Republican and you throw out the word equity, it's like you cussed out their mother. You have to figure out another way to say equity without actually saying the word equity, right? And on and on and on. And so that is challenging. And it requires political savvy, it requires flexibility, it requires agility, because at the end of the day, our communities are depending on us as leaders to advocate for what they need and advocate for them so that we can do the work that we do, regardless of who is in the office. And it's a challenge to constantly have to navigate those shifting tides based on who wins an election and who wins an office and all of that. So that's what I would see as the biggest challenge ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, well, this has been some fantastic information from this panel. We are in our last 10 minutes, so I'm going to ask one final question that only needs a short answer, and then we're going to go to attendee questions. So attendees, take a second to think about if you have any questions, go ahead and drop them in the chat. To our panelists, my last question is about how we can strengthen the position of libraries as anchor institutions if there aren't any of these limitations on resources. Earlier, Tamar said, if there's someone on this call with kind of an endless purse, bottomless, pockets, get in touch. So I'm sure that they're here, and I'm sure that they have bottomless pockets and that they will talk to each one of you. So when you get that phone call, I want to know, just very briefly, what is the very first thing that you will fund? And I'm going to let you volunteer your answers just as you think of it.
Replacing the buildings that aren't functional and fantastic anymore, and then making sure they're staffed. It's really two things, but you can't do one without the other.
Okay, I would add replacing some of the vehicles that we use across the system to what Carrie said. Both our physical buildings and our moving vehicles.
I would say making sure our library staff are fairly and adequately compensated. I think that because libraries are a female-dominated profession and there is a persistent gender wage gap, that libraries and other female-dominated professions like teachers and social workers are at the bottom end in terms of salaries and wages. So I would say just better compensation for our librarians, library workers, and library leaders.
You want me, can I go? So I would actually say, yeah, it's also staff related. I think, making sure, kind of going back to Julie's comments about making sure that you've got the staff who are ready and prepared and have the competencies and have the confidence really to do the work that they're being asked to do. So, when it comes to training and kind of any kind of resources related to that is I think what I would focus on.
I would like to see us have a statewide study like the schools got. I have called that out numerous times that I thought it was such a miss that our statewide blueprint, which focuses on Maryland's education system, did not include our libraries. And I'm like, okay, fine. If you don't want to put us in that study, then spend the dollars to give us our own, because I think a lot of what has been discussed would hopefully be addressed in that. Like I know the education plan is talking about teacher recruitment and retention and salaries and how to improve the education system as a whole. I think it would be amazing because Maryland's so collaborative. Like if we had this very broad statewide plan that looked at the profession statewide.
Tamar, did you get a chance or did you want a chance to respond to this? Your first thing you'd fund?
Oh my gosh, there are so many things that we'd want to fund. I think that we would want to expand our innovation grant program to, give libraries the resources to try things that might not be something that they could develop with their current operating budgets, or might not be able to convince their county executives and county councils that it's worth trying, but we know that there's value in it. So just, having more money for the libraries to try new things from the state library perspective, I think would be hugely impactful and lead to tons of great ideas to be shared out.
That's great. Well, thank you all. I'm going to highlight now a question from an attendee. This came a little earlier in the chat. Jane Hager asked, please describe what you see as inequities and any plans you have to address those. And I want to say, just volunteer yourself if you have an answer to this. No pressure for all panelists to answer, since we only have a few minutes left. Once again, the question was, please describe what you see as inequities and any plans you have to address those.
Yeah, I think I'm pretty sure what a lot of us mean when we say that in this context specifically is that internet is not a utility. It is everyone, especially in this day and age, needs to have affordable access to the internet in order to participate in the world. We saw that during the pandemic, and that's that inequity that our counties are working on, and that we're, like, as Alex and Julia said, like, we're putting our finger in the hole of the dam. We're helping to fill that gap, but it's not the solution to the problem. So it's working with the entities who can actually solve some of these things.
I mean, agreed. I think that's that when I'm talking about inequities, I mean, obviously inequity is like a huge umbrella, huge. But for me in the library world specifically, it is about the affordability of connectivity, right? Like that is the thing that is preventing people, most of the people that we talk to, and most of the people who are borrowing our hotspots, all of the people who are borrowing our long-term lending routers, it's affordability. I mean, and you shouldn't be in a situation where you are choosing between your groceries or your connectivity, because it just, you can't, that shouldn't be a choice that you have to make.
And I will add that there are 20 states, about 20 states in the country where there are laws on the books that favor the telecom industry, that prevent local governments from subsidizing internet or from having internet as a public utility. Maryland, fortunately, is not one of those states, but there are 20 states in the country where that exists. And so that's a huge inequity right there, that, you have states that are able to be more nimble and able to really get their arms around the issue so that everybody can get connected, so that they can just live in the 21st century and survive and succeed. And then you have essentially the other half of the country where they're very much stymied by the laws of capitalism that prevent that from happening.
Thank you very much. I'm gonna open it up to another attendee question. I see Terry Mum, you raised your hand. Is that a question?
I was trying to find the hand raising thing. No, while we had this group in front of us, I wanted to say thank you from Marylanders Online. I'm the new digital navigation program manager. And I've been working closely with Vishnu in the office. So just please reach out to us anytime you need any kind of resource related to digital navigation or tech education. We would love to partner with you. We're also working on the Maryland statewide digital equity coalition, and we want cross-sector representation with that. And I spent quite a bit of time with Ronnie over the last week from the Office of Statewide Broadband. I know, I don't want to speak for them, but it was my impression that the policy side of affordability is very big, a priority for them. So just look for opportunities to have your voice, out in the world about this need, because I think it will come in this next year that we'll see that conversation pick up. So thank you for all the work you do and everything that you provide. And I'm excited to meet you all in person someday.
Thank you, Terry. Appreciate that. We have another hand raised. Jane Hager, can you unmute?
Yes, thank you. This has been a great discussion. I really appreciate your comments and the insights. And I had placed a comment in the chat just about the work that I do with Maryland Accessible Telecommunication. We're in a really similar situation where people that we provide internet-based telecommunication devices to don't know the first thing about trying to be able to get their device connected. And so we are put in a position of having to help them walk through all the steps of doing that, which may include everything from telling them, sorry, but guess what? You've got to have electronic means to be able to set up an account to get cell phone service. And then everything that comes after that, setting up an email, setting up an account, and so forth. And and I'm sure that we're not the only agency doing that as a public agency. I mean, clearly you all are doing the same kind of work. But I find it frustrating that the tech industry making a lot of money isn't providing some sort of support to us or people in general to be able to get these services. Just wanted to share that, and thank you again for all that you do. I love libraries.
Thanks, Jane. That is a fantastic point. Panelists, we are just about out of time. Does anybody want to respond to that comment?
Other than I agree, right? Like, I mean, yes. That you have to imagine that it is a drop in the bucket for Comcast to be able to handle some of this, right? So it is frustrating.
Yeah,
Agreed.
Jane, there was definitely some head nodding to your comments. Okay, well, we've reached the end of our time, so I just want to say a big, big thank you to our panelists and also a big thank you to our attendees. This has been a great discussion of how libraries fit into this bigger picture of closing the digital divide as kind of the human touch point, the human connection point, as someone mentioned, I think in the chat. And also this discussion of what that might look like in the future. So just as my final note, I want to encourage our attendees to keep thinking on these points that have been brought up today, whether you have questions of your own or whether something from a panelist stood out to you. Keep thinking about it and don't keep it to yourself. Talk to someone about these ideas. Maybe someone on this panel, I'm sure they'd all be happy to have you reach out. Maybe a colleague that you work with, maybe a stranger that you stop on the street. I'm not going to endorse that approach, but talk to somebody about this because I want to keep these ideas out there and circulating and in development, because I think that is our path forward, is continuing to work together on this. And that is all we have for you today. Julie has put some links in the chat. Julie, any final notes?
No, I just wanted to reiterate everything that was said. Thank you so much for the robust conversation, incredible ideas, the passion and the energy. We hope to see you at another digital equity webinar series event soon. Thank you all again. Have a great weekend.
Thank you, everyone. Appreciate it.